If your biceps look identical to how they looked 6 months ago despite consistent training, the problem is not how much you are curling. It is something happening inside every single representative that has been quietly blocking the growth signal the entire time. If this is your first time here, subscribe and share this with someone who has been training arms consistently without seeing the development that should be following the effort. This channel breaks down the mechanical and neurological details that most fitness content never gets specific enough to explain. There is a particular frustration that belongs specifically to bicep training. Most muscle groups, when trained consistently with reasonable effort, show visible development within a few months. The bicep is different, not because it is uniquely resistant to growth, but because it is uniquely susceptible to a specific set of training errors that redirect the stimulus away from the muscle without the person performing the movement ever knowing it is happening. Someone can curl 3 times a week for a year and produce modest results not because they train too little, but because the specific mechanical conditions required to deliver a genuine hypertrophic stimulus to the bicep were never consistently present in the curls they were performing. The movement happened. The weight moved. The session was completed. But the bicep, as the primary recipient of the loading, was being partially bypassed by compensatory patterns that the body adopted so early and so naturally that they never registered as errors. Understanding those patterns, and what correcting them actually feels like, changes bicep training from a volume problem into a precision problem. And precision, not volume, is what the bicep responds to. The supination that never happens. The bicep has 2 primary functions that textbook anatomy describes but most people never apply to how they curl. The first is elbow flexion, the movement most people associate with curling. The second is forearm supination, the rotation of the forearm that turns the palm upward. Both functions are the responsibility of the bicep. Both should be occurring during every curl. And for most people performing standard dumbbell curls, only the first one is happening with any deliberate engagement, while the second is either absent or occurs passively at the end range rather than actively throughout the movement. The supination function of the bicep is responsible for a significant portion of its potential recruitment during curling movements. When a dumbbell is held in a neutral grip, thumb pointing upward, and the forearm does not actively supinate during the curl, the bicep's contribution to the movement is reduced. The brachialis and brachioradialis, the elbow flexors that do not produce supination, share the load in a way that reduces the relative demand on the bicep itself. Actively supinating the dumbbell, rotating the pinky side upward and the palm fully toward the ceiling during the lifting phase, engages the bicep more completely through its full functional role rather than just the flexion component. This single adjustment, applied consistently to every dumbbell curl, changes the stimulus the bicep receives from the same movement with the same weight. Not because the load changed. Because the muscle is now being asked to do what it is actually designed to do. The momentum that replaces the muscle. The second error operating in most people's bicep training is one that begins with the very first representative and accelerates as the set progresses, and it is the reason most people can perform more reps than they should be able to if the bicep were doing all of the work. Momentum. The body's tendency to use a small amount of initial body movement, a subtle lean back, a slight hip shift, a minor shoulder elevation at the start of the concentric phase, to generate velocity that carries the weight through the early portion of the lift and reduces the mechanical demand on the bicep at the moment when the bicep's involvement should be highest. This is not a dramatic technique breakdown. It does not look like cheating from the outside. It is a subtle, sub-threshold movement pattern that most people cannot see in themselves and have never been specifically told to look for. But its effect on bicep recruitment is measurable. The momentum substitutes for muscular effort at the beginning of the rep, and the bicep receives a diminished stimulus through the range of motion where it has the greatest capacity to produce force. The correction requires slowing the initiation of every representative to a pace where momentum is physically impossible. Beginning each curl with a deliberate, almost exaggerated pause at the bottom, eliminating any swing before the movement begins, forces the bicep to produce force from a dead stop against the full weight of the load. This is harder than the momentum-assisted version of the same exercise with the same weight. It is supposed to be harder. That difficulty is the stimulus. Adding a 2-second pause at the bottom of each representative transforms a set of 12 momentum-assisted reps into a set of 8 or 9 genuine bicep contractions, and the adaptive stimulus from those 8 genuine reps is greater than the stimulus from the 12 partial effort ones. The peak contraction nobody uses. Here is the specific technique adjustment that separates people whose biceps respond readily to training from people who curl consistently without visible development, and it requires no additional weight, no additional sets, and no additional time in the gym. The peak contraction at the top of a curl, the fully shortened position of the bicep when the forearm is at or above parallel, is where the muscle is capable of generating its highest contractile force. It is also the position most people rush through, using the momentum of the curl to reach and immediately begin lowering, rather than pausing at the top to create the maximum voluntary contraction the bicep can produce. Holding the fully contracted position for 1 to 2 seconds at the top of each representative, actively squeezing the bicep as hard as possible at that moment, produces a muscular contraction intensity that the continuous movement version of the same curl never achieves. The metabolic stress created by that peak contraction is one of the 3 primary hypertrophic mechanisms, and it is the one most consistently absent from the standard curl execution that produces months of unchanged bicep appearance. The eccentric phase, the controlled lowering, compounds this further. Lowering the weight over 3 to 4 seconds rather than allowing it to drop produces the mechanical damage stimulus that drives the repair and growth cycle. The eccentric is where much of the hypertrophic signal originates, and it is the phase most people spend the least time in because lowering the weight slowly feels less productive than the effort of lifting it. Slow lowering. Paused peak contraction. Active supination throughout. Initiation without momentum. These are not 4 different things. They are 4 components of one correctly executed curl. Conclusion: bicep stagnation is almost never a volume problem. It is almost always a precision problem, the result of a movement being performed frequently enough to feel productive while consistently missing the specific mechanical conditions that make it actually stimulating to the muscle it is supposed to develop. The supination that fully engages the bicep's functional design. The elimination of momentum that forces the muscle to generate force from zero. The peak contraction that creates the muscular intensity most curls never reach. The controlled eccentric that delivers the damage stimulus the growth cycle depends on. Apply these to the next arm session. Not all of them at once if that is overwhelming. Start with the slower eccentric and the paused peak contraction. Feel what the curl becomes when those 2 adjustments are present. And understand that the bicep that has looked the same for 6 months has not been failing to grow because of genetics or insufficient volume. It has been waiting for the signal that the curls were never quite delivering. If this explains something that months of consistent arm training never resolved, subscribe and share this with someone whose bicep progress has been invisible despite genuine effort. Every video on this channel is built to get specific enough to actually change the outcome rather than describe the problem.